All that matters is...
Wrong!
This town deserves a better class.
Heavy Metal Podcast.
I'm gonna give it...
If you do not listen, then the hell with you.
Walk through the gate of consciousness. Stone floors drop from under you. The second season of And Volume for All, the podcast. This is a reference to Purple by STP. It was a hidden track, a popular thing at the time. Back to the podcast.
Hey, speaking of podcasts, what is up, you beautiful mother punchers, you bastards of reality, you children of Bodom, the sea, and a lesser god? One of those is not metal. Welcome, or rather, welcome back to And Volume for All, a deeply reverent and lovingly irreverent exploration of the history, philosophy, and future of the greatest music in the world, heavy metal. I am your host body, Quinn. I am so pumped to be back with y'all after my little interregnum here. Interregnum? I hardly know him. Ha! Just a little reminder that even though heavy metal was born in 1970, my sense of humor developed roughly 100 years earlier. Why, I played every music hall and rail station from the San Diego Savoy to the Palace in New Jerk City. That one used to kill at the Savoy. At the Palace? Not so much. Anyway, before things get too weird, and yes, I'm keenly aware that my personal threshold for weird is somewhat higher than your average duck, I want to say thank you to everyone listening. Whether you've been here since episode 1 or you just showed up, you're not late. You're just early for episode 2. Honestly, I thought nobody would listen if I wasn't doing this for a few months, but I get regular updates from my staff in the marketing and engagement department, me for short, and there are new peeps listening all the time. I get messages on Twitter from folks binging the pot. Pitside Dad, Jonas, Beavermosh, a number of others. Hi. Which means they are willing to spend multiple hours in the day with me, proving to my wife and children that it can be done. Ingrades. So thank you. Talking to cool people about music is why I wanted to do this pod, and here you are, making it happen. So find me on Twitter, at AV4APod. And if you want to keep this whole business in business, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pod fix. And make sure that you do hit that 5th star, because I was Googling myself the other day, never in public, learned that the hard way, and I saw a 1-star review of the show on Apple Podcasts, and I was like, oh no, I didn't think Lars would actually listen. But it turns out it wasn't Lars, and I think the person hit the wrong star, because the review is titled Everything in Its Right Place, props for the Kid A reference, and the nameless author very generously refers to the pod as a rare treat, and a really good podcast, and says, it's like you're attending a college class on metal and your professor is funny, except you don't have to worry about your grade or take notes or show up at a certain time because that's boring. Which is A, hilarious, and B, a really kind thing to say about a podcast that you apparently hate. So thank you, anonymous funny hero, for giving And Volume for All that virtual hug of a review before accidentally backhanding me in the nuts as you turn to leave. Like any non-metaphorical nutshot, while it may be temporarily and excruciatingly painful for me to experience, it should be pretty funny for you to watch. And I'm always happy to suffer for my art. Speaking of art, let's get to the subject of episode 1. The semi-permeable membrane that protects this music we love from those insufficiently pure of heart. The nightclub bouncer that doesn't give a fuck who your dad is. Heavy metal vocals. Or what some people refer to as harsh vocals, growl vocals, or puke vocals, mostly when referring to Lamb of God. Haha, I kid. I kid Randy Blythe. Randy, I'm kidding. The guy did some time in a Czech prison, so I would imagine podcaster jokes is pretty far down the list of things that keep him up at night. And to be entirely honest, I think hard time in a European torture farm is the kind of fate we should all wish upon white people who choose to grow dreadlocks. Okay, Randy Blythe prison jokes? Check. For anyone who loves heavy metal, there is no more frustrating and ubiquitous response that one can have to the sound your soul makes as it approaches the ineffable countenance of God than,
I like heavy metal, but the vocals suck.
oh, come on, that's not true. You don't like heavy metal. Because anyone who refers to it as the vocals clearly hasn't listened to too much metal. Vocal quality is one of the chief ways that the larger genre differentiates between its many various subgenres. And if someone really liked heavy metal, they would know that it has more subgenres than all the individual members of Arcade Fire and the Wu-Tang Clan combined. Okay, now I'm picturing Ghostface Killah playing the oboe. Dirty was alive, he could be the oboe dirty bastard. Oh, this is not how I wanted to start the new season. So today, I thought we should do a little history and philosophy of one of the most identifiable and important conventions in heavy metal, the vocals. I have a ton of sound for you, so we should probably start because, as the aforementioned Oregonian Raekwon the Chef advises us, for this particular content dive, we're going to need to get deep like a Navy SEAL. Ay. I like to think of this podcast as heavy metal advocacy. I don't expect everyone to love and understand metal, but I do want people to appreciate that these are artists making artistic choices. If someone says, I don't like all the growling, I want them to know what kind of growling we're talking about. Death metal? Black metal? Sludge metal? Because two of those three aren't really growls at all. So by the end of this podcast, I would hope that all the growl-adverse listeners would choose, instead of saying, I don't like all the growling, to say, I prefer doom and power metal for the clean vocals. Sludge is right on the edge of tolerable, but death growls are a bridge too far for posers like me. I'm just joking. I don't really like most death metal growls myself, but, I originally didn't care for any harsh vocals, and once I started to push through my initial reticence, I found that I actually really loved the use of the alternative vocal conventions, as the euphemism may be. And I would encourage you, dear listener, to attempt the same. When you get that first ping of, this sound annoys me, try to push through it and see what's there. What's the feeling that it's really evoking in you that maybe you don't like? Is it something more like anger or fear or revulsion, or is it even something more primal than that, more ancient? Is this just a sound that you haven't engaged in because, like all things metal, it requires the listener to embrace everything that's truly heavy and difficult? Because that's what happened to me. I was a tiny baby that didn't love harsh vocals, and now I've blossomed into the semi-functional adult you hear today. Or maybe you just hate it, and that's okay too. But maybe you'll understand better why so many of us don't hate it. And you'll know which subgenre of metal you hate most, and that is how you know you've become a true metalhead. So away we go. While harsh vocals were introduced into heavy metal somewhere around the late 70s or early 80s, depending on your definition, when it comes to popular music, one could argue that they were there all along.
Got St. Louis blues, long as I can see. Oh, but God got a heart like a rock in the sea. Hey, bleed my soul, my baby is trying to grip me. Hey, St. Louis blues, got St. Louis blues. Oh, something done is thunder, more than thunder, more than bleed my soul, I really got a St. Louis blues.
That is, of course, Louis Corpse Grinder Armstrong with one of his first vocal recordings in 1928. The first jazz recordings were made about a decade earlier in 1917, but Louis Armstrong was the first vocalist to popularize that growly, gravelly sound due to an injury he suffered to his voice in 1921 after catching a historically nasty cold. which is not dissimilar to what happened to Tony Iommi after an industrial accident cost him the tips of his fingers and forced him to downtune his guitar, inspiring a sound that would be imitated, followed, and worshipped by a generation of musicians like the cult of a merciless and terrible god buried beneath the deceptively placid waves of an ancient sea. As time continued its inevitable march forward, eventually Armstrong's cold would spread to the blues in the form of artists like Howlin' Wolf, and finally into the tiny evil head that sprouted out of the blues' back to scream obscenities in Latin at passing nuns, rock and roll. And so the theme of gravel-voiced growlers naming themselves after their signature sound not only migrated from the blues, but mutated into one of the most bizarre, theatrical, and just plain awesome performers to come out of early rock history. And his name was Screamin Jay Hawkins.
So I sat in the attic, kilo up my nose, and the wind played a tranquil cantata. So as I blew the crack of the enemy's home and the horrible sound of tomato, ketchup, super puree, don't get left behind. Ketchup, super puree, don't get left behind. When a battle arises, I've awoken.
That song is actually a cover of the original Monkberry Moon Delight by Paul and Linda McCartney. Hawkins' version was released in 1973, but obviously his biggest commercial success was I Put a Spell on You, and because we've all heard that song 100 billion times, you've now been gifted with having listened to a second song by Screamin Jay Hawkins, you well-versed musical aficionado motherfuckers. When I went back to listen to I Put a Spell on You for this episode, I thought, man, the late 60s were a weird time, before realizing that that song was actually released in 1956, which is just strange. So while it's easy to dismiss Hawkins as a gimmicky one-hit wonder offshoot of early rock, the dude had a huge influence on a lot of rock and metal musicians, including Alice Cooper, Rob Zombie, and he didn't sell a lot of records after I Put a Spell on You, but he was smart about the royalties, made a fuck ton of cabbage from it, and never stopped being a highly successful live performer, opening for acts like Fats Domino and a band called the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones. So Screamin Jay Hawkins was a proto-shock rocker, but he didn't like the name given to him by his record label, saying in 1973, if it were up to me, I wouldn't be Screamin Jay Hawkins. James Brown did an awful lot of screaming, but he never got called Screamin' James Brown. Why can't people take me as a regular singer without making a boogeyman out of me? It might have something to do with using smoking skull props and opening shows by jumping out of a coffin, but I don't know. I don't know. No. And as if all that wasn't weird enough, the quote I just read from the grandfather of black goth shock rock is from an article in the Financial Times, which is how you know that our world is an extraterrestrial hologram playing out a series of increasingly absurd scenarios to see how much we can all take before we just have to launch the nukes. But the point Hawkins made wasn't a bad one. James Brown did do a lot of screaming, and so did Little Richard. And as with all musical innovations to come from the United States, pretty soon, even white people started to try it. And not just white people, the whitest of people, the English.
Closer now, so let me know that you're mine.
by some chance you didn't recognize the band from that last clip, just go ahead and stop trying to accomplish things in life because it sounds like it's really not in the cards for you. The song was Twist and Shout by the Beatles, and one of a number of vocal performances that John Lennon would absolutely annihilate in the expansion of rock and roll sound that his band would preside over in the 60s. Dude had one of the best screams in rock history, and if you really want to know what I'm talking about, go listen to Your Blues off of the White Album for some super dark heroin music, courtesy of John Lennon. Now that harsher vocal quality was in the hands of Whitey, it was only a matter of time before those melanin-challenged mofos that first stumbled out of the Caucasus Mountains in search of casserole recipes and a fascinating TED Talk did what they do best: make things weird. That is the voice of John Entwistle, the bassist for The Who, on a song called Boris the Spider in 1966. Entwistle came up with the song after a night of abject debauchery with Rolling Stones bassist Bill Wyman, in which the two men spent the entire evening at a bar making up funny animal names. Shouldn't you guys be doing lines off of a hooker smeared in clown makeup or something? No? Funny animal names? Okay. Rock and roll history. The vocal quality Entwistle employs here is called basso profondo, or basso profondo, I don't know which it is, or deep bass in Italian. It's the lowest type of bass voice used in opera, and apparently there are characters in some operas that sing exclusively in basso profondo, such as Baron Ochs in the German comic opera Der Rosenkavalier. Sorry, in the US we passed legislation after World War II that required all German to be shouted. So, sorry Germans, but again, not the worst thing that's going to be said about you. Also want to point out, you don't often get a word sandwiched in between two other words that means the exact opposite, but I just said comic in between German and opera. How about that? But Boris the Spider wasn't the end of experimentation on the Great White Weird. In 1973, a teenager named Mike Oldfield released the first album on the Virgin record label. I wonder why a 17-year-old solo instrumentalist musical prodigy would be drawn to a record label named Virgin. Regardless, the album sold at a painfully slow pace. It was essentially two 20-minute-plus tracks, the second of which featured a vocal contribution that must have been an odd left turn even for an experimental solo artist in the 1970s. Yeah, not exactly a chart topper there. Unless that is the first track on the album gets used for the soundtrack of a film that becomes a cultural phenomenon and one of the highest grossing horror films of all time. Like this one. Tubular Bells went to number 1 in the UK, Canada, or Canada, as I wrote it here. You know what? You got 2 A's already. Do you really need 3? Greedy motherfuckers. And Australia, and number 3 in the US, becoming forever associated with my favorite film of all time, The Exorcist. Yes, I know, that is a weird thing to say, but you made it to season 2, and if me saying weird things is a deal breaker, you really need to ask yourself how closely you've been listening. So the vocals on Tubular Bells Part 2 is more of a novelty than a trend, but a lot of people bought that album, and some of those people undoubtedly listened to the B-side and heard a vocal track that they probably would have never associated with a hit record. Meanwhile, popular music continued to explore vocal qualities that could not be considered pretty by any stretch of the imagination, even by top 10 singles off of chart-topping albums from artists who were known almost exclusively for singing pretty. That's Elton John. More like Belton John, am I right? Hey. I'm so alone. Yellow Brick Road guy. The Candle in the Wind guy. The guy who guessed that was why they called it the blues. And he guessed right. He is absolutely wailing on that track specifically, and deliberately he is aggressively exaggerating that short A vowel in the word Saturday. And here's the thing, I don't know if anyone's noticed this before, but the word Saturday actually comes up a few times in the song. 36. Yes, I did count them. No, I don't know why. Saturday, Saturday, right? That really aggressive A sound. He's English, and so he wants to say, Saturday. Excuse me, Pennyworth, would you bring the car round on Saturday? Instead he's going, would you bring the car around on Saturday? Look, I'm not in any way an Elton John fan, but this song kicks ass. And I think it's a cool example of a popular musician leaning into an intentionally strident sound, matching the quality of his vocals to the subject matter of the song, which is also a definitive feature of heavy metal. Remember episode 1, back when I was a wide-eyed 42-year-old just trying to make a name for myself in the world of working for free? I made the argument that Sabbath, Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and Blue Cheer all worked within the same sonic conventions. But Sabbath were the true inventors of heavy metal because, among other seminal contributions, they were the first to match that heavier sound with heavier subject matter. And I think subconsciously, at least, that's what's happening in Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, am I listening to a podcast where a guy is extolling the heavy metal virtues of Elton John? Imagine actually being that guy. It's so tight. This crown of barbed wire. The point I'm trying to make is that the use of extreme or aggressive vocals to articulate an extreme or aggressive subject is really starting to bubble up around the musical landscape only a few years after the birth of heavy metal in 1970, even in places one would least expect it. I'm featuring Elton John in this discussion because if someone were to ask me, hey, what's the opposite of heavy metal? The first thing I might imagine is a guy singing Tiny Dancer dressed like a giant duck. But Saturday Night's All Right for Fightin' is a song about fighting. Even the lyrics are pretty metal. I'm a juvenile product of the working class whose best friend floats in the bottom of a glass. Don't give us none of your aggravation. We've had it with your discipline. It sounds a lot like that don't tell me what to do ethos that we talked about as one of the fundamental principles of metal. I feel bad for the guy's friend who lives at the bottom of a pint, though. Oi, where's Tony? Tony? Oh no, Tony's crawled into the glass again. He won't come out. Come on, Tony. Football's on the telly. You can't see it from in there, mate. Sod it. I'm drinking him. No, I'm drinking him. Now he's in me. Always with me. Tony, dancing in my head. What is happening? Well, I'll tell you what's happening. We have made it all the way up to the reason that we are here. Sex, metal, and metal. Heavy metal. I don't know why I said sex and then he just got distracted. Which means it's probably time for a break. And when we come back, we will take a whirlwind tour through the evolution of metal vocals from the moment the virus of guttural growls, howls, and screams crosses genres once again to the musical species with which it is now inextricably linked in the popular imagination. Sound is coming fast and furious now, Mother Punchers. Oh man, it's good to be back. I hope you had your shots, because this shit's about to get filthy. When we come back.
We stand burning.